This first story comes from the French countryside. October 1944, an American infantry division was advancing through a region of rolling hills and dense woodland. The German forces had been retreating steadily, but command wanted to make sure there were no surprises waiting for them. A lieutenant named Jack Morrison was ordered to take a patrol into a small valley between two ridgelines. Local maps showed a village down there, but aerial reconnaissance hadn't spotted any activity in weeks. Jack's job was simple: get down there, confirm the village was clear, and report back by dawn. Jack picked 7 men for the patrol, all experienced soldiers, men he trusted. They set out around 8 in the evening, just as the sun was disappearing behind the western ridge. The plan was to move quietly, avoid contact if possible, and be back before first light. The first hour went smoothly. They followed a narrow path down into the valley, moving carefully through the shadows. The forest was thick on both sides, but Jack could see the village in the distance. Small, maybe 24 buildings. No lights, no smoke from chimneys. When they reached the edge of the village, Jack called for a halt. Something felt wrong. The place wasn't just quiet, it was silent. No insects, no wind, nothing. Like the air itself was holding its breath. One of his men, a corporal named Stevens, whispered, "Maybe we should radio back. Let them know what we're seeing." But there was nothing to report yet, just an empty village. Jack decided they'd do a quick sweep, then head back. They moved into the village in 2 groups. Jack led one, Stevens led the other. The buildings were old, stone structures with wooden doors and shuttered windows. Everything was closed up tight. Jack tried the first door. Locked. Second door, same thing. Every building in the village was sealed from the inside. He motioned for his men to regroup in the village square. That's when they noticed the well in the center of town. Old stone well, maybe 4 feet across. Jack walked over to it and looked down. Too dark to see the bottom. Stevens came up beside him. "Think there's water down there." Jack picked up a small stone and dropped it into the well. They waited for the sound of it hitting water. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10. No sound. "That's a deep well," Stevens muttered. Jack was about to respond when he heard something. Faint, coming from one of the buildings, a rhythmic sound, like tapping, slow and deliberate. He raised his hand for silence. Everyone froze. The tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. Always the same interval, coming from a building on the far side of the square. Jack pointed to 2 of his men and gestured toward the building. They moved forward cautiously, weapons ready. When they reached the door, one of them tried the handle. Locked. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then very slowly, the door swung open. From the inside, nobody was visible in the doorway, just darkness. Jack's men looked back at him. He gave them the signal to proceed. They stepped inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. From where Jack stood, he could see the beams of their lights moving around inside the building. Then both lights stopped, pointed at something. One of the men came running back out. His face was pale. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." Jack crossed the square and entered the building. It was a house, simple furniture, a table, some chairs, and on the wall, written in what looked like charcoal, were words, English words. "Don't look in the well." The letters were large, uneven, like someone had written them in a hurry or in the dark. Stevens read the words and let out a slow breath. Who wrote this? Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Jack made the decision then. They were leaving, right now. No more investigation. They'd report what they'd found and let someone else figure it out. But as they were leaving the building, Jack noticed something else. Scratches on the floor, deep gouges in the wood, like something heavy had been dragged. All the marks led toward the door, toward the square, toward the well. They left the village quickly, didn't look back, didn't talk, just moved as fast as they could up the path toward the ridge. When they reached the edge of the forest, Stevens glanced back one last time. He grabbed Jack's arm and pointed. Down in the village square surrounding the well were figures, maybe a dozen of them, standing perfectly still, facing outward, like they were guarding something. Jack radioed for backup the moment they reached their lines. A full platoon was sent down at first light. When they arrived at the valley, the village was gone. Not destroyed, not burned, just gone. Where the buildings had been, there was nothing but empty fields. The only thing left was the well, still there in the center of what had been the square. The platoon leader ordered 2 men to check the well. They lowered a rope with a lantern attached, trying to see how deep it went. The rope went down 60 feet before they hit something, but it wasn't water. It was soft, like cloth or fabric. They tried to pull the rope back up, but it was stuck. Something down there had grabbed onto it. They pulled harder. 3 men on the rope, then 4. Finally, they gave up and cut the line. That night, the platoon camped on the ridge above where the village had been. Around midnight, they started hearing sounds coming from the valley. Voices, dozens of voices, calling out. Names, addresses, details about people's lives. One of the soldiers swore he heard his own name, his own mother's voice calling to him from the darkness. The platoon left before dawn. The entire area was marked off limits. No patrols, no reconnaissance. Jack Morrison survived the war, came home, built a life, but he never talked about what happened in that valley, at least not until near the end of his life. He told his son one thing. He said that when they were leaving the village, when Stevens pointed out those figures around the well, Jack had recognized one of them. It was Stevens, but Stevens was standing right next to him, alive right there. Jack said he saw Stevens in 2 places at once, standing beside him on the ridge and standing down by the well, both of them real, both of them solid. He never told Stevens what he'd seen, never mentioned it to anyone. But 3 weeks later, Stevens went missing during a different patrol. His body was never found. And Jack spent the rest of his life wondering which Stevens had been real, the one that stood beside him that night, or the one that stood by the well. This story takes place in northern Italy, January 1945. A British unit was holding a position in the mountains, defending a supply route that connected 2 larger Allied positions. It was cold, miserable, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and doesn't leave. A sergeant named William Harding was in charge of the night watches. Every night, he'd assign men to patrol the perimeter. 2-man teams, 4-hour shifts, standard procedure. One night, he sent out a team consisting of 2 privates, good soldiers. Names were Cooper and Walsh. They were supposed to check the northern approach, an old mountain path that wound through the rocks and disappeared into the darkness. Cooper and Walsh left at 10 o'clock. They were due back at 2 in the morning. 2 o'clock came and went. No Cooper, no Walsh. William waited another 30 minutes, then assembled a search party, 5 men. They followed the path, calling out names, checking every shadow. They found nothing. No sign of the patrol, no blood, no equipment, nothing. When they got back to camp, William was preparing to report the missing men when he saw them, Cooper and Walsh, standing near the edge of camp, waiting to be relieved. William walked over, ready to tear into them for being late, but when he got closer, something stopped him. They looked wrong, not injured, not dirty, just wrong. Their faces were blank, expressionless. Their eyes were focused on something in the distance. "Where the hell have you been?" William demanded. Cooper turned to look at him. It took him a moment, like he was remembering how to focus. "On patrol, sir. You were supposed to report back an hour ago." Walsh blinked slowly. We did report back. We've been here." William felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "No, you haven't. We sent a search party looking for you." Both men stared at him with those empty eyes. Finally, Cooper spoke. "We walked the path. We came back. We've been standing here waiting." William didn't know what to say. He told them to get some rest, that they'd talk more in the morning. Cooper and Walsh nodded and walked toward their tent. But something made William follow them, some instinct telling him not to let them out of his sight. He watched as they entered the tent they shared with 4 other soldiers. The moment they stepped inside, William heard shouting. Then the flap burst open and one of the other soldiers came running out. Sergeant Harding. William ran over. What is it? The soldier was shaking. Cooper and Walsh, they're already in there. They've been asleep for the past hour. William pushed past him and looked inside the tent. Sure enough, there were Cooper and Walsh, both of them in their bunks, sound asleep, still wearing their patrol gear. He turned around, looking for the 2 men he'd just been speaking to, but they were gone. William ordered a full search of the camp, every tent, every foxhole, every storage area, no sign of them. The Cooper and Walsh sleeping in the tent were the real ones, so who had he been talking to? In the morning, William woke up Cooper and Walsh, asked them what happened on their patrol. They said they'd walked the path like they were supposed to, but about halfway through they'd heard something. A voice calling from deeper in the mountains, calling their names. They'd stopped, listened. The voice sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once. Cooper said it sounded like his mother. Walsh said it sounded like his brother who died at Dunkirk. They'd stood there for what felt like hours listening to these voices. Then suddenly they were back at camp. No memory of walking back. No sense of time passing, just back. William reported the incident to his commanding officer. The officer dismissed it, said the men had probably fallen asleep during their watch and dreamed the whole thing. But that night, William was lying awake in his tent when he heard footsteps outside. Slow, measured, walking past his tent toward the perimeter. He grabbed his rifle and went to investigate. In the moonlight, he could see figures walking along the path, 6 of them, moving in single file toward the mountains. He raised his rifle and called out, "Halt, identify yourselves." The figures stopped, turned. William's blood ran cold. They were all men from his unit, men he recognized. But as he looked closer, he realized something. 3 of them had been killed 2 weeks earlier. He'd seen their bodies. He'd written letters to their families. And the other 3 were Cooper, Walsh, and William himself. He was looking at himself, standing there on the path, staring back with those same empty eyes. The figures turned and continued walking, up into the mountains, into the darkness. William didn't follow. He went back to his tent and sat there until morning, rifle across his lap, trying to understand what he'd seen. The next day, he checked the roster. Cooper and Walsh were still there, still alive, still performing their duties, but something about them was different. They moved like they were sleepwalking, responded to orders a beat too slowly. A week later, both of them volunteered for a dangerous mission, a reconnaissance deep behind enemy lines. They never came back. William survived the war, went home, but he never stopped thinking about that night, about seeing himself walking up that mountain path. He said the worst part wasn't seeing his own face. It was the look in his own eyes, like whatever was looking back at him from inside his body wasn't him anymore, like something else had put on his face and learned to walk around in his skin. He died in 1983. But before he passed, he told his daughter something. He said that sometimes, late at night, he'd hear footsteps outside his window, slow and measured, walking past his house toward the hills. And he was terrified that one day, he'd look outside and see himself walking by, going to join all the others on that path, going to wherever they went and never came back from. This one comes from the Philippines, 1945. The fighting was brutal, island by island, jungle by jungle. An American Marine unit was camped on the eastern side of a small island, preparing for a push inland. A captain named Robert Chen was planning the next day's advance when his commanding officer gave him a strange order. A patrol had gone out the previous night and hadn't reported back. 5 men. They were supposed to scout a valley about 2 miles inland. The strange part was that nobody remembered sending that patrol. The officer couldn't find the order in any logs. None of the other sergeants remembered assigning men, but someone had reported it, said they'd seen 5 Marines heading out around midnight. Robert was ordered to take a team and find them. He assembled 6 men and they set out at dawn. The jungle was thick, hot, the kind of heat that makes everything shimmer and blur. They followed what they thought was the route the missing patrol would have taken, a narrow trail that wound through the trees toward the valley. About an hour in, they found the first sign. A helmet, American, sitting in the middle of the path. No blood, no damage, just a helmet carefully placed like someone had set it down to rest and forgotten about it. Robert picked it up and checked the inside. There was a name written on the liner, PFC James Walker. One of Robert's men, a lance corporal named Pete, went pale. "Sir, that's my friend. Walker's still back at camp. I saw him this morning." Robert frowned. "You sure?" "Positive. We had breakfast together." They continued forward, more cautious now. A half-mile later, they found another helmet, then another, then 2 more, all with names written inside, all belonging to men who were, according to Pete, still back at camp. When they found the 5th helmet, Robert called a halt. Something was very wrong here. He radioed back to base and asked them to check if the names on the helmets matched anyone in the unit. The response came back 5 minutes later. All 5 men were accounted for, present and active. So whose helmets were these? They pressed on. The valley was just ahead. As they approached, Robert noticed something. The jungle had gone quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of their own breathing and footsteps. They emerged from the tree line and looked down into the valley. It was empty, just grass and a few scattered trees. But there, in the center, was something that shouldn't be there. A campsite, 5 packs, 5 rifles, 5 sets of boots, all arranged in a perfect circle around a dead fire. Robert and his men moved down into the valley slowly. When they reached the campsite, Robert knelt beside one of the packs and opened it. Inside was a journal. He flipped it open to the last entry. It was dated the previous night. The handwriting was shaky. It read, "We heard them calling, all 5 of us, our own voices, coming from the jungle, calling us by name. We're going to find out where it's coming from if we don't come back." The entry ended there, just stopped mid-sentence. Robert looked at the date again. Last night, but these packs looked old, weathered, like they'd been here for weeks. Pete was examining the boots. "Sir, these are too small. These aren't combat boots. There. I don't know what they are." Robert looked closer. Pete was right. The boots were wrong. Too small, too old, like something from another era. One of the other Marines called out. He'd been examining the edge of the camp and found something. Footprints, leading away from the circle, into the jungle on the far side of the valley. Not 5 sets of prints, 10. Robert counted them twice. Definitely 10. Like the patrol had met 5 other people and they'd all walked off together. He made the call to follow the prints. They led into the jungle, deeper than any of them wanted to go. The trail was faint but traceable. It wound through the trees for maybe 20 minutes before it reached a clearing. And in the clearing, they found them. 5 Marines standing in a line, backs to Robert and his men, facing the far tree line, completely still. Robert called out, "Identify yourselves." No response. The figures didn't move. Robert approached slowly, rifle ready. When he got within 10 feet, he stopped. He could see their uniforms now. American, but wrong. The style was off, like uniforms from an earlier time. He moved around to see their faces. They weren't men, they were statues. Perfectly detailed, life-size statues carved from some kind of dark stone. faces frozen in expressions of confusion or fear or something else. Pete came up beside him. "What the hell is this?" Robert didn't answer because he was looking at the face of the nearest statue, and he recognized it. It was Walker, Pete's friend, the one whose name had been in the first helmet. He checked the other statues, all 5 names from the helmets, all 5 faces of men who were, supposedly, still back at camp. Robert radioed for immediate extraction. He didn't explain why, just said it was urgent. As they were waiting for the response, one of his men shouted, "Sir, look." He pointed at the far tree line. There were figures emerging from the jungle, 5 of them, walking slowly toward the clearing, toward the statues. Robert ordered everyone back. They retreated to the edge of the clearing and watched as the figures approached. They were Marines, living, breathing Marines, and as they got closer, Robert recognized them. They were the same 5 men whose faces were carved into the statues, walking toward their own stone likenesses. When the men reached the statues, they stopped, stood there facing them. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then very slowly, the statues began to move, turning, facing the living Marines. Robert didn't wait to see what happened next. He ordered his men to run. They crashed through the jungle, didn't stop until they reached the beach. When they reported what they'd seen, the area was immediately declared off-limits. No patrols, no reconnaissance. But here's the thing that still haunts Robert. When they got back to camp, they checked on the 5 men whose names were in the helmets, Walker and the others. They were there, all 5 of them, going about their duties. But when Pete tried to talk to Walker, his friend just stared at him, like he didn't recognize him. None of the 5 spoke. They performed their duties mechanically, ate when they were supposed to, slept when they were supposed to, but something was missing. Pete said it was like looking at a perfect copy of his friend, but the person inside was gone. All 5 men died within a month. Not in combat, just died. Heart failure, the medical report said. All 5 of them. 5 healthy young men, all dying of heart failure within weeks of each other. Robert Chen never went back to that valley, but before he died, he told this story to a journalist. He said the worst part wasn't seeing the statues or seeing the men walking toward them. The worst part was that when he'd looked at the faces of the statues, he'd seen something in their eyes, a warning, like they were trying to tell him something but couldn't move their stone mouths to speak. And he spent the rest of his life wondering what that warning was, what they'd seen that had frozen them in stone like that, what was waiting for anyone who went looking for them. The valley is still there, still marked on maps, but nobody goes there. The locals avoid it, and sometimes, they say, if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you can hear voices calling from the jungle. 5 voices, calling names, trying to lure people into the trees, looking for more statues to add to the collection. This story comes from the Soviet front, winter of 1943, near Leningrad. The siege had been going on for over a year. Supplies were scarce. Morale was low. Death was everywhere. A lieutenant named Viktor Sokolov was in charge of a small unit tasked with defending a section of the perimeter. About 20 men. They'd been there for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of cold, hunger, and occasional German artillery. One night, Viktor was ordered to send out a patrol. They'd received reports of possible German movement in the forest to their north. He selected 4 men, experienced soldiers who'd been with him since the beginning. Their names were Alexei, Dmitry, Mikhail, and Pavel. They left at midnight. They were supposed to scout 2 miles north, check for any signs of German activity, and return within 4 hours. 4 hours passed, then 5, then 6. No radio contact, no signal flares, nothing. Viktor prepared to send out a search party, but his commanding officer ordered him to wait until morning. Too dangerous to send more men into the darkness. At dawn, Victor took 8 men and followed the patrol route. They found tracks in the snow, 4 sets, leading north. They followed them for about a mile before the tracks disappeared. Not like they'd been covered by fresh snow, they just ended in the middle of a clearing, like the 4 men had simply vanished mid-step. Victor and his team searched the entire area, found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just 4 sets of footprints that led nowhere. They returned to their position and reported the missing patrol. That night was quiet, tense. Everyone was on edge. At midnight exactly, Victor heard something, a radio transmission, static at first, then a voice. "Lieutenant Sokolov, this is Alexei. Do you copy?" Victor grabbed the radio. "Alexei, where are you?" "We're proceeding north, 2 miles out. No sign of enemy activity, returning to base now." Victor felt a wave of relief. "Acknowledged, see you soon." The transmission ended. 4 hours later, there was no sign of the patrol. Victor tried to raise them on the radio. No response. At dawn, he took another search party out, followed the same route, found the same clearing where the tracks had disappeared the day before. Only this time there were 8 sets of footprints, the original 4 and 4 more, fresher, from his search party the previous day. But that didn't make sense. His team had walked through this clearing, yes, but they'd also walked out of it. There should be prints leading both in and out. These only led in. Victor was studying the tracks when one of his men called out. He'd found something at the far edge of the clearing, a piece of paper pinned to a tree with a knife. Victor walked over and read it. The message was written in Russian, in handwriting he recognized as Alexei's. "Don't send anyone else. It's waiting for you. Every night at midnight. Don't answer the radio." Victor pulled the knife from the tree. It was Soviet issue, standard combat knife. He checked the handle. Alexei's name was carved into it. They returned to base immediately. Victor reported what they'd found, and the area was marked for further investigation. That night at midnight, the radio crackled to life again. "Lieutenant Sokolov, this is Alexei. Do you copy?" Victor stared at the radio, remembered the note, "Don't answer." But he had to know. He picked up the handset. "Alexei, what happened to you?" A long pause. Then, "We're proceeding north, 2 miles out. No sign of enemy activity, returning to base now." The exact same words, the exact same inflection, like a recording. "Alexei, this isn't funny. Where are you really?" Another pause, then a different voice. "Dmitri, Lieutenant, we need help. We're trapped. It won't let us leave." Victor's heart was pounding. "Where are you? Tell me where you are and I'll send help." "The clearing. We're in the clearing, but we can't see each other. We keep walking, but we never find the edge. It's always just more clearing, more snow. And at midnight, we have to make the radio call. It makes us. We can't stop ourselves." The transmission cut to static. Then Alexei's voice again, calm and emotionless. "We're proceeding north, 2 miles out. No sign of enemy activity, returning to base now." The pattern repeated, over and over. The same message from Alexei, followed by Dmitri's desperate plea, then back to Alexei. Victor turned off the radio, but that night he couldn't sleep. At exactly midnight he heard it, faintly, coming from outside, the sound of a radio transmission, the same words, Alexei's voice, coming from the darkness. He went to the perimeter and listened. The voice was coming from the north, from the direction of the clearing. For 7 nights this continued. Every midnight, the same transmission, sometimes Alexei, sometimes one of the others, always saying the same things. On the 8th night, Victor made a decision. He was going to that clearing. He was going to find his men. He went alone, against orders, didn't tell anyone where he was going. He reached the clearing just before midnight. It was empty, just snow and moonlight. He stood in the center and waited. At exactly midnight, he heard them, footsteps, coming from every direction at once. 4 sets of footsteps, walking through the snow, getting closer. But he couldn't see anything. No figures, no shadows, just the sound of boots crunching through snow. The footsteps circled him, around and around. Victor turned, trying to track the sounds, but there was nothing there. Then a voice right beside his ear, "Alexei, why did you come?" Victor spun around, nothing. "We told you not to come. We tried to warn you." "Where are you?" Victor shouted into the darkness. "We're here, we're always here, walking the same path, making the same radio calls, every night at midnight, forever." "How do I get you out?" A long silence. Then, "You can't, but now you can join us." Victor felt something grab his arm. He looked down but saw nothing. No hand, but something was holding him, something cold and strong. He pulled away and ran, crashed through the snow back toward his position. Behind him he could hear them, 4 sets of footsteps, matching his pace, following him. He didn't stop running until he reached his camp. When he turned around, the forest was silent. But he knew they were out there, still walking, still trapped. That night Victor was relieved of duty. His commanding officer said he'd been acting erratically, seeing things, hearing things. He was sent back to a field hospital for evaluation. The doctors said it was battle fatigue, stress, hallucinations brought on by the siege conditions. But Victor knew what he'd heard, what he'd felt. Years later, after the war ended, he returned to that area. The forest was still there. He found the clearing. In the center, carved into the trunk of a tree, were 4 names: Alexei, Dmitri, Mikhail, Pavel. And below them a date, the date they disappeared. Victor never told anyone about that trip, never explained why he needed to go back. But he said that sometimes, even now, decades later, he wakes up at exactly midnight, and he can hear them, faint, like they're calling from very far away. "Lieutenant Sokolov, this is Alexei. Do you copy?" And he wonders if one day he'll answer. And when he does, he'll find himself back in that clearing, walking the same path they walk, making the same radio calls, every night at midnight. Forever. The final story takes place in North Africa, 1942. The desert campaigns, brutal sun during the day, freezing cold at night, and endless stretches of sand where it was easy to get lost. A British reconnaissance unit was operating out of a forward base, gathering intelligence on German positions. The unit was led by a major named Henry Whitfield, experienced, careful, not the type to take unnecessary risks. One evening, Henry received coordinates for a German supply cache that had supposedly been abandoned. Command wanted eyes on it before they sent a larger force to secure it. Henry selected a patrol, 6 men. They'd drive out, check the coordinates, take some photographs, and return by morning. Simple operation. They left at sunset in 2 jeeps. The coordinates would take them about 30 miles into the desert. Remote area, no known enemy presence. The first 2 hours went smoothly. They navigated by stars and compass. The desert at night is beautiful in a haunting way, silent, vast, like being on another planet. Around 10 o'clock they reached the coordinates, but there was nothing there, no supply cache, no abandoned equipment, just empty desert. Henry double-checked the coordinates. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, but there was nothing. One of his men, a corporal named Davies, suggested they search the immediate area. Maybe the cache was buried or hidden. They spread out using flashlights to scan the sand. After about 20 minutes, Davies called out. He'd found something, not a supply cache, something else. Henry walked over. Davies was standing at the edge of what looked like a hole in the ground. Not a natural formation. It was too regular, too precise, like something had been dug out and then partially filled in. Henry knelt beside it and shined his light down. The hole was deep, maybe 20 feet, and at the bottom he could see something. Fabric, canvas. Looks like parachutes, Davies said. Maybe a supply drop went wrong. Henry considered it. That would explain why there was nothing on the surface. The supplies had crashed and buried themselves. He ordered 2 men to rappel down and check it out. They set up a rope and one of them, a private named James, started descending. James got about halfway down when he called up, "Sir, there's something strange down here." "What do you see?" It's not parachutes, it's tents, like someone set up camp down there." Henry frowned. "In a hole, that doesn't make sense." "I know, sir, but that's what it looks like." James continued down. When he reached the bottom, there was a long silence. Then, "Sir, you need to see this." Henry didn't like the tone in James's voice. He called down, "What is it?" There are bodies down here, but they're not German, they're British, and sir, they're wearing our unit's insignia." Henry felt his chest tighten. "Say again." "They're ours, sir. Our unit. I recognize one of them. It's Corporal Davies." Henry looked over at Davies, who was standing right beside him, alive, confused. "That's impossible," Henry said into the darkness. "I know, sir, but I'm looking at him right now. And the others, I recognize all of them. It's our patrol, all 6 of us." Henry made the decision to go down himself. He clipped onto the rope and descended. When he reached the bottom, James pointed his flashlight at the corner of the pit. There they were, 6 bodies, British soldiers, wearing their unit's patches, and Henry recognized every face. Davies, James, the 4 others, and himself, all dead, all arranged in a circle around a map. Henry knelt beside his own body. It was real, solid, cold. He'd been dead for what looked like several days. There was sand in his mouth, in his eyes. He looked at the map they were arranged around. It was a military map of this region of the desert, and marked on it, in red, were coordinates. The same coordinates they'd been sent to investigate. Henry stood up slowly. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. James was backing toward the rope, his face pale. "Sir, we need to leave, right now." Henry agreed. They climbed out of the pit as fast as they could. When they reached the surface, the other men were waiting. They looked shaken. Davies stepped forward. "Sir, while you were down there, we heard something. Engines coming from the west." Henry listened. Sure enough, there was a distant rumble, getting closer. "How many?" he asked. "Hard to say. At least 2 vehicles, maybe more." They didn't have time to investigate further. Henry ordered everyone back to the jeeps. They'd return to base and report what they'd found. But as they were driving away, Henry looked back. In the moonlight, he could see the pit, and standing around it, watching them leave, were figures, 6 of them, silhouettes against the sand. They drove through the night without stopping. When they reached base at dawn, Henry immediately reported to his commanding officer. He explained what they'd found, the pit, the bodies, the impossible situation. The officer listened without interrupting. When Henry finished, the officer looked at him for a long moment. Then he opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. "Major Whitfield, I need you to look at something." He handed Henry the paper. It was a casualty report, dated 3 days earlier, listing 6 men killed in action during a reconnaissance mission. All 6 names were Henry's patrol, including Henry himself. Henry stared at the report. This has to be a mistake. We're all here, we're all alive." The officer stood up and walked to the window. "Are you?" Henry didn't understand. "Sir." The officer turned to face him. 3 days ago, your patrol went out to investigate those coordinates. You never came back. We found your jeeps abandoned 20 miles south of here. No bodies, no trace. You were declared KIA. "But that's impossible. We just got back, we." The officer held up his hand. "Major, look at yourself." Henry looked down at his uniform, at his hands. In the morning light streaming through the window, he could see it, sand covering everything, and his skin, it was gray, lifeless. He wasn't breathing. He realized he hadn't taken a breath since they'd left the pit. The officer spoke quietly. "I don't know what you are, but you're not the men who left 3 days ago. Those men are dead. They're buried in the desert, and whatever came back wearing their faces, that's not them." Henry looked at his hands, watched as sand began to pour from his sleeves, from his collar, from his mouth. He tried to speak, but only sand came out. Behind him, he heard screaming. He turned and saw his men, all 6 of them, coming apart, dissolving into sand, their faces frozen in expressions of confusion and terror. Henry felt himself falling, the world tilting, and the last thing he saw before everything went dark was the officer, backing away, reaching for his sidearm. The official report stated that Major Whitfield's patrol was lost in a sandstorm. Their bodies were never recovered. But there are rumors. Soldiers stationed in that region talk about seeing jeeps in the desert at night, driving in circles, always heading toward the same coordinates. And if you happen to be out there when they pass, you might see the men inside, 6 soldiers, sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead, their faces covered in sand. Still searching for something they'll never find. Still trying to get home.